Well, hello everybody. John Crook here. Welcome to another episode of Communications and Cigars. Coming to you here on Monday night, February 28th. Thank you for everybody that is joining us tonight on this episode of entitled To Mod or Not to Mod. Yes, that's right. We are going to tackle this subject. We are going to create anger. We are going to, I don't know what else we're going to do, but I'm going to go ahead and take a drink here real quick because I have a feeling that tonight is going to create a lot of discussion and problems and anger and all that kind of fun stuff here. So why not? Let's go ahead and do into that. So once again, thank you for joining my channel and subscribing to Communications and Cigars, where we go ahead and talk about communication items as well as we also do kind of touch a little bit and talk about cigars. Yes. And one of the things I did get asked a lot, someone said, John, where exactly did the idea for this channel come about? And I said, well, actually the idea for the channel came about was because I noticed that sometimes I was actually out enjoying a cigar in the nicer weather of upper Midwest, Wisconsin. And I was talking about communications, and I would talk on the radio while I'm enjoying a cigar or be doing something while I was listening to cigar communication-wise. Whether it be listening to the scanner, talking on the amateur radio, talking on FRS, GMRS, talking on business, listening to business, whatever the case may be, I was enjoying that. So you know what? I said, hey, it would be kind of cool to go ahead and do this. So that's where I went along, and I said, hey, guess what? Let's go ahead and do it that way. And then I kind of wanted to do a few episodes, and I kind of, if you followed my initial beginning, we actually kind of started out on Facebook, and then we kind of progressed from there. And then someone said, well, why don't you do it on YouTube? So we tried doing it on YouTube. And if you look at it, it's kind of like Simpsons. Okay. Simpsons, when they first started out, Family Guy, that like all these weird cartoons, the way they were all drawn and everything like that. And then it was kind of like, okay, like it looks really bad. But now you watch Family Guy, now you watch The Simpsons, it's all polished and everything like that. And as a matter of fact, you'll actually notice here, we did some things in the background here that actually now have it set up so that we are, like there's a green screen here. Now you can't see it. So it's like my horrible, ugly bench behind me is no longer behind me. It looks like I'm just in some weird room, sort of like the, the Matrix or something like that on there. But before we get started into the show here, let's go ahead and I always like to acknowledge the guests that come in because I really want to say, hey, thanks for everybody that does come in, comment on the channel when we're doing live episodes, or comments on the channel even when we weren't doing live episodes. Sometimes we do recorded. I'd like to say that I have nothing better to do than just sit and do episodes and stuff, but really I don't. I do have to do things from time to time, but like last week's episode, we did the recording from the field, which was recorded, but people checked in. So let's go ahead and run down here. So Brian was actually in the first one tonight here from what I saw on there. So Dean and Brian, Scout 75, thank you. Wild Cascadia Radio, thanks for checking in. Chuck KB8YIT, Marvin Dresden, Alon is in there. Brian AD8GI, and Anthony. And Nico is once again there. Paul Hotman. Hey, Paul, thanks for checking in this evening on there. We have Liberty Cave, WS7PB. And then we have Ben Manley. And so that's about it for right now. So thank you, everybody that checked in this evening. So before we dive into our topic tonight of to mod or not to mod, and then some other things we're going to add here, let's talk about the cigars. So, you know what? I've asked people to say, John, sometimes I can't enjoy a good cigar, or, hey, if you're busy or doing activities, what can you recommend for someone who would like to have a cigar, but they really can't? So what I go ahead and recommend here is this little tin of, this is a Tatiana tin. They're minis on there. So they are, these happen to be rum flavor, but they're very nice. You can pick them up. They usually have a tin, have a couple packages in there. I'll kind of put it in the camera there a little bit, but I don't want any to spill out here. But they're nice because they are basically these mini cigars, and that's literally what it is. So, I mean, I'll go ahead and show you here. Just kind of hold it in my hand of things. Nice little mini cigar there. Some people like it. I don't know. They're really nice. When you have a chance that you want to go ahead and enjoy a cigar or something like that on there, you can have that cigar. And boom, there you go. And they have a nice aroma too. Even just kind of smelling outside of the tin, or if you open up the tin just a little bit on there, it's really, really nice on there. So I really, really kind of like it on there. And yeah, that's basically it for going ahead and looking at the Tatiana rum tipped cigars on there. So, but with that, hey, part of our show tonight, and this is going to kind of move in our next segment here. Part of our show tonight, people, I shouldn't say people, but a person wrote in, and it was kind of, I already had kind of this episode planned, but I wasn't really exactly sure when to do it. And good evening, the Smoking Ape, for joining us in here too. But people had like, I really want to go ahead and I really want to touch on the subject, John. And it was a good suggestion that they made. So the reason I'm bringing it up and saying it this way is because if you do have ideas, comments, or suggestions for the show, please go ahead and email us at the show at communications-cigars@jjkcom.com. Once again, communications-cigars@jjkcom.com. We are sponsored by JJK Communications, and yes, it is a company that does help us go ahead and bring you these shows in the better interest of educating people on being able to handle and deal with communications things. So there's a lot out there, obviously, in dealing with communications. And sometimes it can be very, very, very overwhelming. And, even the most sophisticated, smartest person with dealing with communications, they will go out and tell you they weren't born with this, that they had to learn. And the best thing I think we can do in the communications hobby, and I'm not talking about amateur, I'm talking about anything, whether we're dealing with FRS, GMRS, MERS, amateur radio, CB, marine, aviation, all that kind of stuff like that. The best thing that we do is pass that information along until the next generation. That's how we keep things going, and that's how we do things. But with that being said, it sometimes is a fact that, guess what? Not everybody knows everything. And if you saw my video earlier in the week, you'll know what I mean by the next part, in that I don't necessarily know everything. But don't tell my wife. So with that being said, I'm going to send out the help page. And what is that help page? Well, that help page that I just sent out is basically calling out to you, the fans of Communications and Cigars, and I am looking for people who are aware or who know about certain topics and are what I want to call subject matter experts in a field. Now, subject matter experts, what do you mean by a subject matter expert? I mean someone that is aware of a certain topic, that knows something about a topic in depth. And I mean truly, truly in depth. And guess what? With that being said, there are many, many people out there that know about things that are truly, truly, truly in depth. And that's what I want to hear. That's where I want you to be able to come on board and say, hey, John, I know this. I know this. How can I help out? Well, because guess what's going to happen is I am going to go ahead and have you on our show. If you have something that you could be a subject matter expert on, I want you on the show. I want to have you as a guest. But I do have to vet you. No offense, I do have to vet you. So it wouldn't be right for me to go ahead and saying, hey, come on our show and not know about it. In order to vet you, I'm going to ask you to fill out a form. Now, that form on there is a simple form. Now, I know some people are like, oh, God, form and stuff like that on there. Fine. If you don't want to fill out the form, I posted it just in our chat link here. Also, too, if you want to be able to come on there, fill out that form to let me know what you are really skilled about. I'm not going to go ahead and give away any information on there. If you don't feel comfortable about the form, which I understand some people don't, then go ahead and at least email me. Okay, at least email me, because I have some really great ideas for upcoming shows, but I may not know the in-depth intricates like I should. So for that, once again, don't be afraid to go ahead and email us up here. But now let's get on to the core of tonight's episode, and that is talking about modification of radios. Now, a couple of weeks back, maybe even a couple months now, I did a show where we talked about the CFR, the ECFR codes, basically the codes and the statutes, the things that basically say why a amateur radio is certified for Part 95 operation and why a public safety radio is certified for Part 90 operation. It meets certain standards, all these kind of things on there. So when a radio is made, we have to remember and we have to be aware that the radio is made for a specific purpose, and that purpose really kind of translates into a specific band even. So with that in mind, we have to make sure that we understand that when we have a radio that is being used for a specific purpose, it is type accepted and approved for that purpose. Now, what does that mean and how does that tie into tonight's episode? Well, some radios can be modified, and some radios can easily be modified by using hexadecimal, which is what we see on here, which is basically we're digging into, for sake of a better term, the programming, okay, of a radio. The bits of the radio, the bits in the programming that say, hey, I want to be able to take and transmit on a wider frequency or a different frequency on there. And this is what we call hex editing, okay? And in that case, you literally are taking these lines of code, these lines of hex, and the hex represents something specific. They represent a frequency range. They may represent this and this and this and this. So what happens in this part is that you now are basically going into the core of the radio and saying, no, software, don't stop at 150. Go down to 146. Go down to 144. Or maybe, hey, radio, don't stop at 460 megahertz. Go up to 470. Now that's one type of modding of the radio. And we're gonna discuss this more here, but I want to kind of talk to the two different types. So this is really software based on there. Now, some radios are only going to be able to be modified software, and some radios are going to actually be able to be modified physically. And this is what we tend to in the amateur community know more about this. This is, hey, remove resistor or blah, blah, component X, Y, Z, A, B, C, that kind of thing like that on there. So in that case, yeah, that's what we're more aware. And in that case, then what happens is that the software doesn't need to be modified, but it actually will allow the radio to transmit out of band. So what's an example? Well, once again, amateur radio is a good example on there. Most amateur radios are designed to do 144 to 148 in the US, North America, of course, and then 430 to 450, or actually 449.995. Okay, just like 144 to 147.995. But with that, the software says, okay, hey, wait a minute here. I can actually receive maybe 136 to 174, and I can receive 420 to, let's say, 470 megahertz. But when you go out of the band, out of what the radio is allowed to transmit by these little tiny resistors and stuff, then the radio is going to bonk at you and say, no, it's not possible on there. So this comes into question. Modification, many levels that we have to deal with. So first of all, can it be done to the radio? Well, it can be done. Does it need to be done, or should it be done? That's where we're going to reference back to the part 90, 95, all those kind of things like that talk on there. Lots of these parts are, for sake of a better term, designed so that it doesn't cause interference to other radio services or radio bands, and to basically say, hey, we know this radio is only going to work in this band or in this frequency segment or at this power level or on these frequencies. Alrighty. That's where people kind of have this modification attitude is kind of what I'll say on there. Now, once again, this is the part that's going to get a little dicey. Many people believe that, hey, I should be able to modify a radio and transmit wherever I want to transmit. Wrong. Okay, wrong. There are rules. And this comes into, I guess I would say, more of an ethical or a moral aspect of modification of your radios. So is it ethically and morally right for me to modify a radio. Now, you're going to, when I was laying this out and I was reading this kind of thing too, and I ran it past a few people like, how the hell does ethics and morals play into this, John? And here's what it is. Ethically, is it right? Well, do I have the ability to do it? Should I be able to do it? Can I be able to do it? And then morally is like, well, why am I going to be doing this? Let's face it. There are people that you can think of, and you might be one of them yourselves. God knows I've screwed with a couple of drive-thrus in my day. I'm not saying date or time so anybody can come after me. But I'm saying is that, you know what? There's been times we've all played around with it. Alrighty. And lots of times we've played with it to a degree that maybe the betterment of things got you there. An example, back in the days, lots of drive-thrus happen to be on VHF frequencies. I can think of a fair share of people I know that went and modified amateur radios, Part 95 now, and interfered with Part 90 communications. So now we get into this area here of, whoa, okay, now you've modified it to just basically screw around with someone. That's where we come into this ethical and moral dilemma issue. Because are you doing it under the guise of, hey, I need to be able to do this in case there's an emergency and blah, 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 and be able to talk at any frequencies? Let's face it. Back maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would kind of probably be on your sideline and saying, yeah, you need to be able to transmit when you transmit. But realistically, with all the radio services that are out there today, and if you have a license, GMRS, FRS, MERS, amateur, marine, aviation, all these different things that are out there, you're trying to tell me that you have to modify a radio to be able to do that. So that's kind of that ethical and moral aspect on there. Now, I'm not trying to be the radio police in any way, shape, or form. I'm just laying it out to you is that why do people need to modify radios? Now, let's talk about the one major reason why someone might need to modify a radio. And in that case, that is going to be the need of MARS usage or some sort of usage that may allow you to modify the radio. So yes, there are situations, there are times where a radio could be modified and be used in a different band or a different segment that it's not normally designed for. And that would once again falls in that MARS, Military Amateur Radio Service. Alrighty. Now, that's how a lot of people get this guy on there that goes ahead and says, okay, I'm going to go ahead and modify my radio, and I could do it because I'm a MARS affiliate. Yeah, okay. Once again, yes, no. Once again, ethically and morally. Some people, once again, will use that just as a guise to modify a radio. Where now you take a look at it, and wait, I have never really done MARS anything. Am I going to be able to modify the MARS thing? And actually, a lot of the manufacturers have actually started to catch on to this. And they actually will start to put heavy restrictions or sanctions against that. But then you have other people who will actually do the modification for you as long as you pay them. So once again, here comes that ethical and moral dilemma on there. Now, is it fun to modify a radio? Yeah, it is. It kind of learns the skill set. You kind of do it like hex editing. I never really knew anything in any way, shape, or form about hex editing. And I wanted to actually modify a Motorola radio. Now, here's the interesting part about it. It wasn't to modify, it was modify to go into the ham bands. So if we take a look at that ethical moral dilemma and situation is that, okay, it's a Part 90 certified radio. Now, the Part 90 certification actually gave 136 to 174. Well, guess what? The amateur band for the U.S. is 144 to 147.995. Guess what? That is in that 136 to 174. So now the question comes, excuse me. Now the question comes into play is, can I ethically and morally do that to be able to talk on the ham bands? So guess what? The radio was Part 90 accepted. I said, yes, it was. So boom, I went down and guess what? I modified it to be able to go into the ham bands. Had no problem doing that whatsoever. So in that case, yeah, great. I took the time to learn how to hex setting. I learned something new, something different, studied up on it, made sure I was understanding what I was doing, and boom, I went along and did it. Now, is that a good case of hex editing? I would say yes. Was it a good case of modifying? I would say yes, because I was able to bring a radio into a band portion that was the radio was type accepted for. Now, does that mean that it's the same case if you have an amateur radio to take it up to the public safety bands? And once again, that's kind of not on there. But we're going to cover that in another minute here. So let's talk about modification. So the modification and actually physical modifications on there are a lot different. Way back in the day, like when I got into it in the 90s, early 90s, man, things were a little bit bigger component-wise. We had bigger resistors. We had bigger diodes, those kind of things like that. Now, I mean, these things are small. These are like specks of pepper. I mean, that's how small they are on there, the specks of pepper. And that really then kind of creates a situation of, wow, man, how are you going to do that? And this isn't something that you could take your 30-watt soldering iron. No, you take it in there, you're gonna damage things. You're gonna damage things big time. And let's face it, do we really want to damage things big time? No, we don't want to damage things big time. So that is where we pop into the situation saying, maybe we shouldn't really do any sort of hex editing, or modifications. We should maybe look at doing hex editing if possible. And yeah, you know what I'm saying? So that's really where it kind of comes into these situations, and that's where it's really, really hard to say. And I don't really know what the good advice is to you, except that you have to kind of play it sort of in these things. Now, let's talk about it this way. Another big thing that we want to go ahead and think about is really coming into, can the radio actually handle the hex edit? And I know it sounds really weird, but guess what? Some radios cannot handle hex editing. They really can't. And what do I mean by that? And it's just really what I mean by that is that some radios are designed that you can only have it really have a stable transmitter in, let's say, the 144 to 148, or way back in the day. Motorola mobile radios, the Centaur X9000 with the A9 control head. Oh my God, that was a beautiful radio. Love that radio. And guess what? It could only go down to 146. It could only go that far. If you went down any further, the radio could not handle it. The front end, the tuning, nothing could go ahead and handle it properly. So that's where it comes into play is that sometimes when we take a look at modifying radios, while the radio in essence should be able to do it, it really isn't able to be done. Now, that kind of sounds weird. Well, then why can a radio be modified to do it? Well, I mean, no offense. I when people said that, I said, okay, your speedometer goes 120 miles per hour. So does that mean you need to drive your vehicle at 120 miles per hour? Well, the answer is no. We shouldn't be driving our vehicle at 120 miles per hour. But can our vehicle still do it? Yes, it can. So that's where it kind of comes into, can the radio actually handle it? Now I'm going to come into this kind of other final point, which is going to kind of merge into what this other part is, which kind of would be talking about tonight. And is the radio capable or set up for you to be able to talk on what you need to talk about? All right. Follow me on this. I know it kind of was weird. A lot of people will modify amateur radios to be able to talk into the public service or like FRS and stuff like that on there. Yeah, is the radio designed for it? That's the first thing you got to answer. Lots of times amateur radios will work great up to a certain level, and as it goes up in frequency, the power level and the performance goes down. The receivers decline in the reception. The power of the radio goes down, okay? But one important thing that the amateur radio bands, that FRS bands, that even Marine bands were kind of said, hey, you don't need to follow this. was when it came down to narrow banding. So narrow banding, real quick, for those of you that may not be aware, was something that the FCC came out and said, guess what? We're running out of room in the VHF spectrum. Yeah, so, well, we need to put more frequencies in the VHF spectrum. Yeah, so, well, what we're going to do is we're going to go and make your bandwidth smaller. And when we make your bandwidth smaller, then we could put more frequencies in there. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, I'll use that example I've used in times in the past, is think of it as a road. Okay, think of it as a road. You're going down a road, right? And you have 2 lanes. All right, that would be, let's say, wideband. Then what you did is you said narrowband, which is what we're going to do is we're going to basically take those 2 lanes and we're going to divide each of those lanes in half. So now a 2-lane road became a 4-lane road. All righty. And if you had more frequency, you could easily take, maybe it would start out as a 4-lane road, and now you made it into an 8-lane road. And what you did is you increased the narrowness of the bandwidth. So basically you decrease the bandwidth. So you said, if this is 25 kilohertz bandwidth, now we're going to go down to 12.5, because if now, hey, look, there's 2 signals. Top here, bottom here meets 25, but we have 12.5 here, 12.5 here. To even go more narrowband, to go ultra narrowband, as I heard it called sometimes, that's requiring digital. So we're not going to talk about digital right now. We're kind of just talking about in general, just kind of FM analog stuff on there. But as we go to narrowband activities, we then go to what we call splinter frequencies. So what happens is that the stepping of the radio needs to become more narrow. So way back in the day, everything was like 5 kilohertz. You know, so 1.100, 0.105, and then 0.110, 0.115, 0.120, 0.12. You get it, okay? But with narrowbanding, what we needed to do is we needed to go splinter frequencies. Well, what is half of 5 kilohertz? Well, guess what? That's 2.5 kilohertz. So now what you did is you have channel stepping as 2.5 kilohertz. So now, if we were to say it in essence, you had to take your dial, go click, click, 2 channel steps in order to get what the 5 was. So in other words, if we had 1.100, we changed it to 5 before, we go 105. Well, not anymore. Now it would go 0.100, click 0.1025, click 0.105. See what I'm saying? So it had to decrease the channel step. Now, where this comes into an issue, and this is where that question comes into the modification, is that can your radio handle the narrow bandwidth, and can it handle those splinter frequencies, as sometimes they're referred to as? So most amateur radios, and I'm talking truly amateur radios, go down to 5 kilohertz channel stepping. They won't go down to 2.5. So now if you have a frequency, so let's say you modify your radio. Hey, I want to talk on VHF public safety. Okay. Now that frequency I'm talking on is narrow bandwidth. So that frequency is, let's say, 155.1025. Well, guess what? My modified radio that doesn't do 2.5 kilohertz channel stepping may not do 155.1025. It might do 155.100 or 155.105. And people are like, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. You're only 2.5 kilohertz off step. Yeah, but now you get into some crowded areas where there's a lot of high noise floor. Now you get into crowded areas where there's lots of issues, okay? Like there's multiple frequencies on top of one another that you need to have narrow bandwidth because you need to be able to handle that there. And if you have this frequency here of, let's say, 155.1075, and then you have this other one here of 155.1025, they can actually coexist because they're narrow bandwidth and they have enough separation between the two. But if I can only transmit on 155.105, I'm below the 107.5 and I'm above the 102.5, what's going to happen if I'm trying to transmit here? I'm going to splatter over. I'm going to cause interference because I'm using a radio that's not designed to meet the parts. And that goes back to that part 90, part 95. Okay, Part 90 radios need to be able to do the new 2.5 kilohertz channel stepping and be narrowband only. Okay, we're complete opposite when we get into public safety, when we get into the VHF business frequencies and stuff. We need to be narrowband. And in special circumstances, FCC approval, this and this and this and this, then can I be a wideband channel? There still are a few wideband channels, but for the most part, it's all narrowband up there. Amateur, we're different. Hey, we're wideband underneath the whole sun and everything like that. And then occasionally we'll be narrowband. Like we'll be on a narrowband repeater because it's a splinter frequency. Now, that's where it gets into the area of to modify or not to modify. Some people will argue cost. Some people will go ahead and argue the ability I need to be able to carry one radio. There's multiple solutions that are out there. But this leads me into a letter, an email that I received. Now, I'm not going to say this person's call sign. I'm not going to say this person's name because I asked if I could use the email that they sent me, but I didn't ask the username or a call sign. And I don't want to embarrass them. I don't want to be something that causes problems. But I'm going to read the letter here, this email that I received. And by the way, I want to thank that person for sending this to me. It believe it or not to get mushy or anything, but it made me feel very appreciative that this channel is doing something, that this letter came. So let me read it here to you. Sorry, I'm going to look up at my screen over here. So, sir, I am a police officer and I just received my ham radio license. My motivation for getting my license was for emergency communications to work with our local areas group. Our department, in conjunction with the fire department, maintains a VHF repeater in the 155 megahertz range. We currently do not have any radios assigned to officers that can use the channels, as they are all on 800 megahertz trunked encrypted systems, but dispatch has access to the repeater. I've been looking for a mobile radio to mount in my cruiser. I would use it 99% of the time just on the ham frequencies, but would like the ability to use the VHF repeater if needed. The department will allow me to install one, however, I don't have much room to make it fit. I've been looking at such and such radios, and I'm not going to say the model numbers of the radios or anything like that in there. I have seen so-called Mars mods that allow radios to transmit just outside the ham bands. Do you know if these models that I listed could be made to do this? If they can't, do you have any other suggestions that might work for me? I have looked into LMR radios like Motorola and Kenwood, but between the price and difficulty of programming, I'm not sure they would be a great fit. Any information you could provide would be greatly appreciated. Love the show, by the way, learning a ton about radios. So thank you very much. Here's what I replied. This is a very good question and one that is asked by many and pondered by many as well as with different factors. The first and foremost is going to be FCC type acceptance for aspects of legal operation. This has been taken as an aspect of the FCC does not care, but when push comes to shove, I believe that it would become an issue. Mainly in the case of illegal activities as well as if someone was to become hurt or injured. The next aspect is going to be quality or functionality of the radio for operation. A prime example is the 2.5 kilohertz step mandate that all Part 90 certified radios need to meet, which is not a requirement of Part 95 radios, example amateur radio. The 2.5 kilohertz is a mandate based upon the narrowband requirement that all Part 90 radios now must meet for operation. I would say the final aspect is design of the radio, and in particular the RF portion of the radio. The features of public safety LMR is different than amateur for signaling, encryption, etc. While some use Part 90 radios in Part 95 areas, the opposite is somewhat true, but with limited aspects for a head-to-head comparison. Also, many amateur radios do allow out-of-band transmit, but the power tapers when out of the ham bands. Frequency stability becomes an issue, as well as the radio being able to maintain out-of-band operation. To answer from a two-sided perspective, I would say this. 1. Technical. I would not recommend it as the risk or possible problems exist as compared to buying a non-Big 3 Motorola, Kenwood, or Harris type radio, meaning I wouldn't recommend it because an amateur radio is not going to be different than using a full-size commercial radio. That's what I meant by that. The second part would be a user. I see it happen all the time with success rate in the mid to upper 80s. I would have to suggest to view it as how your needs play and the level of being comfortable. Also, thank you for watching the show. So this raised a whole bunch of questions, and I thought this tied in really great for this episode. Do people do this? Yes, they do. Should they do it? I can't answer that. I really can't. Should you do it? I can't answer that either. I'll tell you, I've been in the heart of Chicago. I've seen Chicago PD carry Baofangs on them. Yes, Baofangs on them. And the reason they carried Baofangs on them is because they were assigned a detail to a certain nightclub or a certain restaurant or something. They guess what they were using? Baofangs. All right. Okay, is it wrong to use a Baofang if it's technically Part 90 certified for that purpose? Well, no. Legally, no. Is there probably other radios that are probably better? Yeah. I mean, yeah, there is. But that is going to come down to you. That's going to come down to you, the individual user that needs to do it. There are more than the big three radios, and that's what I stress, and that's what I tell people. And as a matter of fact, in my opinion, we started to see, especially on this topic, more and more of the people starting to get down into this thing of saying, you know what? If people want, FPP on their radios, then let's let them have FPP. It's not just the government, black Tahoes, sunglasses and ear piercings, and we're the government, we're here to help. No, there's a lot of people that have significant reasons or purposes to have FPPs. And for people that know what FPP is, that's front panel programming. Lots of times a Part 90 radio needs to be locked by the front panel, or the ability to turn on the feature to program by the front panel is an option or something that you can turn on later. Now, a lot of people who are hams that also have public safety or need to carry public safety or LMR grade radios, they look for that option. Myself, that same way. I have radios, Motorola, Kenwood, Maxon, the different radios that all have FPP enabled. Because guess what? If I'm going to travel with my radio, I'm going to be able to tune certain things on there. And FM, that's easy to do. When we get into digital, that's a different story on there. So what really kind of comes into play here? Well, once again, that's going to go ahead and be a thing that you need to figure out and you need to kind of handle on there. So that kind of is the little spiel about to mod or not to mod. But before we do that, I see a lot of people in our chat here. I'm going to take a moment to just kind of give an editorial. I see a lot of people in our chat here. I see a lot of good conversations that actually take place. Here's my chance for you. Hey, if you have a show on YouTube that deals with communications, you talk about communications, something to do with communications, doesn't have to be amateur specifically, could be anything, but if it deals with the radio, right now, I'm going to ask you to put your show or a link to your show in the chat here. Or if you got a name of your show or something like that, go ahead and do that. Put that in the chat here right now. And while everybody's typing about that, here comes tonight's... You know what really bends my antenna? Talking about modification or not to do a modification on there. The thing about it is that what a person does with their radio is really, in essence, that's what they want to do with their radios. So in that case, if someone wants to go ahead and modify their radio for some sort of purpose on there, and it's an illegal operation, then you know what? They're going to have to deal with it. One thing I will tell you that is going to piss me off something fierce, and this is personally me, but I'm sure a lot of other people, is when people modify a radio to be able to modify the radio, or more importantly, because they intend to screw around with people. That is not acceptable in any way, shape, or form. It really isn't. When you start interfering with other people's communications on there, guess what? Not cool, dude. Not cool. Don't be that guy or gal, alrighty? But if some people want to modify radios, guess what? Go ahead and do it. As a matter of fact, a lot of exploration, a lot of modifications have led to progression in radios. Technically, if you use an SDR, okay, if you used an SDR, and I still have the little tiny little SDRs that were designed for nothing more than receiving television signals, if those weren't modified, if those were not done with going ahead and actually doing this, the hex edit, guess what? We would not be where we are at today with SDR technology. We really wouldn't. The ability to modify something to be able to expand and experiment is at the foundation of what we tend to do as people in an electronic hobby, such as amateur radio or something like that on there. Alrighty? So with that being said, exploration and experimentation do actually work and are great. However, it kind of starts to come into the question of are you going to have your villain story by modifying a radio and using it for purposes that it doesn't belong or that it shouldn't be done? As I stated earlier in the show, you need to know your limitations. If you want to modify a radio to be used on a frequency that radio cannot properly perform on, then no, you shouldn't do that, because you are doing no one good. And here's the problem. Here is truly the problem. If you go ahead and modify the radio and you do something wrong, the sad part about it, the way the society is, which is a different topic altogether, but is that they are not going to blame you. They're going to blame us as the community, as the radio operators, as the radio technicians, as the people that want to go ahead and do this. We sometimes have a situation where we live under a stigmata. Hey, you know that guy that lives in the basement and talks to Mongolia and all the Golias and eats Velveeta shells and cheese. Yeah, sometimes guess what? We're viewed as nothing more than a bunch of old crusty white guys who haven't shaved, showered, or basically come out of their basement for a while. Where the exact opposite is true. Many people get into the different radio hobbies for different purposes and different reasons. But does that mean that one bad apple still can't ruin it for the bunch? No, unfortunately it can. So if you are going to modify, please make sure that you're doing it for a specific purpose, and more importantly, that you're within the legal realm of going ahead and being able to do it. Just to be able to do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should be able to go ahead and do it. Well, guess what? That's it for tonight's episode of Communications and Cigars. I hope that you actually took something away from it, kind of raised some questions, kind of thought a few things about that. Once again, more importantly, make sure you check out the chat here. I'm going to go ahead and post it again one more time. If you are interested, if you are a subject matter expert and you want to be able to come on the show here as a guest to help me with some upcoming topics, please feel free to fill out the form. And if you don't want to fill out the form because, hey, you don't like it or something like that, I'm going to put my email back up here if I can grab one more time. Don't be afraid to email me. Like I said, I have some really great show ideas coming up, but you know what? You can't listen to me blabber on for 1 hour. Also, another thing too is if you have a show, if you are a part of that YouTube community, you have a channel, you want to get your name out there, please feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat there too tonight here. Let us know what show you are. I saw a few people up there already. You know, the guys from Coffee and Ham Radios. Love you guys up there. We got the Smokin' Ape. Usually Ham Radio Dude is on there too. TO and then KK6 USY Ham Radio Adventures on there. If you do, once again, have any other, you do have a show or something on there, definitely put it up there because you know what? We as a community all come together. You may hear something that I say and it may not click with you, but you may be able to go with one of those other channels and you may be able to watch the same thing. And for you, then, hey, it makes sense to you with them. So we all need to be a part of that community. So until then, I want to say 73 to everybody. Stay safe. And if you have them, enjoy your cigars.